Want to see one of the best videos ever on health, weight loss and longevity? Well, the Imagine That team had an idea. Although we're generally focused on doing very high quality shorts, informative and entertaining, they were saying that perhaps I might put one of my best kind of biochemical metabolic health videos out there for the subscribing audience. So here it is. It's around 40 minutes long and it covers everything you need to know about health, weight loss and longevity.
Why you should be interested in this chat. In this room, or out there, anyone listening, middle-aged, over a third of you will have a heart attack by your early 70s, and in many cases it will be fatal. Many more will pass from diseases that are related to the same things that cause heart disease. And I could do some pretty simple blood measurements and pretty much mostly know who would be going down and who would live a long, healthy life. And I'll explain those to you. So if you look at all people, generally, heart attack and stroke will take out over a third of them. Kidney disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, which is kind of type 3 diabetes, this cluster of diseases will take out another big chunk, and are closely related in cause to the heart attack and stroke. Cancer, terrible disease, another quarter of people almost will go down with this. And the root causes of cancer are many, but some of the key ones for some of the worst cancers with the most mortality relate in root cause quite closely to the things that drive these. And then you have chronic respiratory and COPD, and essentially that's very closely tied to insulin resistance, which is a common factor with all of these. Finally, you have accidents, and I'm afraid you'll have to look after the risk of those yourself. And the last little slice is influenzas, coronaviruses, and respiratory transmitted diseases. And sure, recently in the last couple of years, we got hit pretty hard with the latest addition to the coronavirus family. But again, in the people who are not afflicted with these disease processes or are not very aged, very much less hit. So we're still going to work on all of these in order to reduce risk even for the respiratories. Today's talk addresses all of this risk, all the major causes of mortality and early mortality, pretty much nearly the whole pie. So I've lectured in the British Association for Cardiovascular Prevention in London. I've debated professors on stage at the National Institute of Preventive Cardiology in Ireland. So I've got around to many very orthodox venues as well as many nutrition conferences all over the world. And one of my favorites was in Israel in 2019 in Tel Aviv. I look a little younger there. But I went through insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia and links to cardiovascular disease and all the cholesterol technology and science. And I'm going to explain that for you today fully. So, quick story for myself, 2013, I got some standard blood tests, and they should look something like this. But I was way up on serum GGT, a liver enzyme, way up on serum ferritin, an iron loading measure in the blood, and I was also way up in cholesterol. So I saw the values, and I'm a biochemical engineer, but I'm not too familiar with these, but I did know they meant something very significant. So I grilled the doctor, and then a few weeks later another doctor more senior, and then a professor of medicine on the two key questions. A, what are the implications of readings this high? And B, what are the root causes so I can address them in my life and collapse my risk, hopefully. But I got some answers about eating more whole grains and less fat and hemochromatosis for the iron, but none of them made sense to me. So I realized, wow, there's something huge missing in the heart of medicine, that if the experts don't actually really have a good grasp of their basic standard tests, there's some huge hole there. And I can go in and research, because biochemical background, I'm an expert problem solver for over 25 years. This is what I do. And I'll find out what it is, because it's huge. It has to be. So I went to ResearchGate and PubMed. I had corporate logons and tens of thousands of publications on ferritin, cholesterol, and gamma-glutamyl transferase. I have no problem going through the pathway of following the metrics, following the data, and finding out, well, what causes them. So here's me in Singapore, 2013. I just found out my early couple of weeks of information, and I was shocked with what I found. I was quite a lot heavier there, around 25 pounds heavier, and wasn't happy with what I discovered. So root causing time must continue, and I must then implement a solution. So I'm going to show you the solution I implemented. This is what I was eating: highish fructose, loads of orange juice for my 5 a day, right? Fruit. And I was eating chocolate, not hugely, but quite a bit. And I didn't understand the terrible implications of sugar, so I wasn't too careful with sugar. Reasonably good diet in general with real foods. My wife is a good cook and traditional foods, but also I was eating some stuff that I realize now was very junky. And I was taking vegetable oils because they're heart healthy. And excessive carbohydrate was the main problem. So I was eating all my healthy whole grains and rice and fruits and pastas, whole grain pasta, smoothies for the 5 a day. And potatoes are really healthy, right? With minerals and everything. So that was my major problem. Root cause solution, I knew after my research I had to switch the diet completely, and I did it on a knife edge, and I didn't change anything else or do any more exercise. I wanted to specifically analyze my proposed hypothesis and whether it would work. So I switched to this diet. Much more meat, fish, eggs, cheeses, butters, nuts and olives, and avocado and tinned fish, even, sardines, and all that kind of food primarily, and vegetables, non-starchy, non-sugary, above ground vegetables. They're great. And I cut right down the carbohydrate, the starches and the sugary stuff, and I kind of had low sugar fruits as opposed to the big juicy apples and oranges, which are bred for sugar. And of course I cut out the orange juices. I was drinking a lot of that, and I cut out the sweets, and I started eating high cocoa, higher fat, lower sugar chocolate. So that was it basically. Did a knife edge switch, and I held to it. I pretty much didn't realize at the time, but I was doing a kind of a paleo, low carb, pseudo keto diet, but I wasn't aware that there was movements like that around the world. I thought I had discovered something new, which was kind of funny. So here's my GGT as an example at the start, and what happened. I realized from my research I had a form of undiagnosed type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, the biggest disease process in the Western world. But no one talks about it. They talk about cholesterol. So what happened? Went to this diet, no other changes. 6 weeks later, got blood tests, and the GGT had tumbled. 2 weeks later, or 2.5, I got more because I wanted to see the vector, where it was going, the direction, and it continued on down. But much more than that, my ferritin collapsed, my cholesterol, the ratios, which I now understood from my research, had gotten way, way better. My blood pressure had gone right down to normal from hypertensive. I was being suggested pills for years for this. My weight came down a lot. Now it's around 12 kilograms, or as I said, 25, 26 pounds. And my waist came down to a pleasing 32 inch. So I dramatically looked different, and everyone in my corporate workplace were kind of shocked and wanted to know why. This is what happens when you find a true root cause of a major issue. It doesn't just fix the thing you are targeting, it tends to bring up the quality of everything in the system. That's a real root cause, and I had demonstrated it, and you can do it too. So the content of this, I'm going to go pretty quickly, the cholesterol conundrum, and then go beyond cholesterol to the primary causes of coronary vascular disease, and then the power of the calcium scan and the solutions so that you can save your own skin and not have early mortality from the big pie chart I showed you earlier. You can go longer, stronger, more productivity, mental acuity, joie de vivre, feel great, change your whole life with relatively simple steps, and I will show you them towards the end. Cholesterol conundrum. Now, I gave this lecture in 2013, I think, but you can Google it on YouTube with my name, Ivor Cummins, and it really is very good, I think, and it was very popular, and I explain all the biochemistry in a way that lay people can follow, the whole cholesterol system and a lot more. So consider finding that on YouTube and indulging in it. But I'm going to show you a real summarized version, simplified. So from LDL, bad cholesterol, through to damaged LDL. Your liver, most important organ in your body, I guess, after your brain. It's an absolute incredible organ that is central to your health. It produces the VLDL, the very low density lipoprotein, right? So that's the mother of LDL. And it has cholesterol and triglycerides stored within itself. It's like a submarine or a vessel, and it can move around in its trillions around your aqueous or water-based blood and keep these fatty compounds inside. Otherwise, you'd have oil and water. It's sent around the body to deliver triglyceride fats for healthy energy, for muscle, and to be stored in body fat. If you're eating more than you need, you will build body fat for later use. And it continues along on its journey, giving up more triglyceride to the cells and tissues that need it. And then at some point it loses its proteins that identify it as a VLDL, and it becomes an LDL, a low density lipoprotein, the bad cholesterol. But there's nothing bad about this, surely, in this exotic, incredible system our body has developed. And the cholesterol that comes out of your liver, 80% of it is made by your liver, and only around 20% relates to your diet. And if you eat less cholesterol, your liver will make more to compensate. And if you eat more cholesterol, your liver will make less. So this system's beautiful, and this is at the end of it, LDL. And HDL, your good cholesterol, is another wonder worker, and it transfers triglyceride and cholesterol molecules in and out of these different boats or submarines, keeps everything balanced, and returns elements to the liver. So it's an incredible system. And the LDLs return to mama. There's scavenger receptor B1 and cholesterol receptors in the liver, many. So the healthy LDL is taken up and recycled. Nature never wastes, and goes out again or goes in to make bile salts, etc. So a perfect system. So what's the problem? Well, what if you damage this system? What if external influences such as diet and lifestyle cause this system to go out of whack? Now that would be a problem. And what if you put sand in the engine and damage the LDL and have it not taken up so readily, so it stays in the blood longer and gets more damaged by your blood sugar and other components in your blood? Well, then you're heading for trouble, and we showed you earlier what that trouble is. And it's not just heart attack and stroke. It's a lot of other diseases if you do the things that mess up your cholesterol system. The root causes of this problem and others, that's what matters. So we need to look at the root causes and see what they drive. Well, they drive oxidized or glycated or desilylized LDL. They drive damaged LDL and mess up HDL's function too. There's a lot of measures you can use that are extremely good to tell there's a problem, like your blood triglyceride divided by your HDL. You get those from your standard cholesterol panel. Your blood insulin is crucial. Blood sugar also, and blood pressure, great indicator. And a visual indicator, middle obesity. Even if you're not obese, that kind of fat in around the middle can often indicate a problem. Visceral fat, fat in your organs. And indeed, all of this, which is driven by the root causes, will drive atherosclerosis, the inflammatory disease of your arterial wall. And it will drive a lot more as well. Again, the reminder, it's not just heart attack and stroke. There's a link as well to all the other major diseases of modernity. So part 2, beyond cholesterol, to the primary root causes of heart disease and more. What do leading edge experts say in the cholesterol field around LDL? Well, cholesterol and disease experts are called lipidologists. And one of the USA's foremost, even world foremost, is Thomas Dayspring. And I won't even read out his letters, but he is up to his ears in the world of cholesterol and medicine. He's a clinical assistant professor of medicine and a director of cardiovascular education. And he's a big pharma guy. He promotes a lot of, pharmaceuticals. So it's not like he's some kind of woo acupuncturist. This guy's an industry guy. And he replied to me in 2014, and I asked him a cheeky question and kind of led him down a bit of a path, and he blurted this out. It's utterly true, but I'm not sure he really wanted to admit it publicly. But anyway, so the current US data, the majority of MI, myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, are explained by IR, insulin resistance. But the real message is, unless LDL, the standard measure you get, is above 200 milligrams, that's US units, or above 5 point something millimole in Europe, LDL is a terrible biomarker. And I'll just translate that to make sure you understand. In reality, the majority of heart attacks are due to insulin resistance, and LDL is a near worthless predictor for cardiovascular issues. That's it. Clear as day, and it may surprise you. So what's this insulin resistance thing then, if it's such a big deal? Well, if this is LDL as a causal driver of coronary vascular disease, this little mouse here, well then this is insulin resistance. And it's a funny picture or a way of putting it, but it's not overstating. This is the relative importance of insulin resistance to LDL as a measure of risk, as a driver of disease. So, give you one study. I've got hundreds. They all say the same thing, but this one was very useful and very clear. It was men who had a heart attack, and they measured them carefully in many measures, including cholesterol and insulin and more. And they got to see what would predict a second heart attack, what was really predicting the cardiovascular disease progression. And they found out that high total cholesterol and high LDL bad cholesterol even didn't predict a future heart attack over the 7-year tracking. High blood pressure did mean you doubled the risk of having another heart attack. And what about high insulin? How did that predict a second heart attack? Nearly 7 times more likely if you had high insulin. So you can see here how important insulin is. And funny enough, insulin and high insulin and insulin resistance, it actually drives most of that hypertension, especially in the West where everyone has hypertension. It's salt retention in the kidneys due to high insulin and the insulin resistant state that causes your blood pressure to go up. So in a way, blood pressure is just a proxy for the real deal. Insulin resistance. It's not everything, but it's nearly the only thing you need to understand, manage and control. So, Framingham Heart Study running for 3 generations, world's longest running research project in heart disease. And the director, William P. Castelli, back in 96, I think, published a paper, and he said it clearly even though it was unpopular. Unless your LDL standard levels are very high, that's 7.8 millimole in Europe or 300 milligram per deciliter in the USA units, this is huge. But unless it's that high or higher, the LDL has no value in isolation in predicting those individuals at risk of coronary heart disease. So that's stunning, but he's correct. And he also said that the total over HDL ratio that I mentioned earlier was found to be a better predictor of coronary heart disease than all the other measures, not only in the Framingham study, but also in Physicians' Health Study and many other studies. And in the decades that followed, the studies kept saying this. No question. The LDL is super weak in predicting anything, and the ratios are really good. And that's because the ratios reflect insulin resistance. So I'll show you that slide now from the introduction when I was in Israel. Insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, which go hand in hand, high insulin and resistance to its action, drive cardiovascular disease and all of the pie chart like nothing else. But this state of insulin resistance also decreases or lowers your HDL cholesterol, your good cholesterol. So that's why it shows up in your cholesterol metrics. And it increases small dense LDL. So it messes with LDL too. So the LDL kind of reflects indirectly that this real problem is going on. And that's why LDL is so weak as a risk factor, because insulin resistance is the big kid on the block. Insulin resistance in 3 minutes. Can I do it? Whoa, I've got around 1,000, 2,000 papers on insulin resistance in all aspects of disease. Look, we'll try it. We'll go for 3 minutes. So, you got your pancreas and your intestine in there beside it, and this releases insulin based on signals in the body to manage your blood sugar. You've got around 30, 40 trillion cells, and they all need to respond to insulin, and they need to manage blood sugar. Your liver is crucial. The Vietnamese called it the seat of the soul. Well, it's the seat of modern chronic disease for sure when it gets damaged. So, if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, whether they call them healthy whole grains or they're brown rice rather than white rice, they're mostly just glucose. And if you're eating a lot of that kind of food stuff, it goes into your intestine and it triggers quite a lot of insulin. It's its nature. Insulin needs to manage glucose coming in the mouth. So the insulin goes to your body's cells and prepares them to take in glucose, goes to the liver to prepare it to manage this glucose coming in, and it also feeds back to the pancreas in a control system to kind of manage the overall response of the pancreas. So insulin is crucial. It's one of the oldest key molecules in the human, and it's in so many other species as well. Too much glucose. How much is too much? We won't get caught in that now, but if you're eating a lot of this over time, you're going to drive more and more insulin and push yourself into a risky area. That's the first knockout punch you can give to your body. Too much glucose, too much carbohydrates, refined wheats, refined grains, rice, all of this low nutrient density, glucose-centric food stuff. And if you keep doing it and keep eating too much, your insulin will rise, it will grow, and it will create a problem over time. It's just reality. Fructose, if you're eating a lot of actual sugars and fruit sugars, that's fructose. And that has a very specific action on the liver, which in small amounts is not a problem. You can handle it. But in larger amounts can be very problematic. How much is too much? Well, the World Health Organization says 5 teaspoons in a day for an adult male. That's next to nothing. There's around 12 teaspoons in a single small can of Coca-Cola. So, few apples, oranges, you're going to get this fructose up to the limit. And that will tend to make your liver insulin resistant and accordingly your body. So fructose is a problem. You got to be really careful and not go overboard. That's the second knockout punch you can deliver to your physiology via your liver, is too much fructose. Now there's many more things that can drive insulin resistance, this terrible process that leads to so much death. And I won't read them out, but you can look at them there. And there's so many things that raise insulin. But one thing of note is omega-6 seed oils or vegetable oils. Heart-healthy vegetable oils are inflammatory, and you should be eating real natural fats only. So that's just a notable one there. But this is the third whack you give to your liver when you're doing these things. And basically that's the one that could really take you down. So it can make your liver, along with the fructose and the excess glucose, your liver begins to get sick and you have insulin resistance within the liver. And that's one of the first steps. I'm going to make it simple here. If you raise your insulin through doing these things, it will tend to drive insulin resistance in your body's cells because your body cells need to protect themselves from the action of excess insulin, and they need to protect themselves from excess glucose. They have no choice. But insulin resistance building in your body will tend to send a signal back to the pancreas demanding more insulin, because insulin resistance drives the pancreas to release more to overpower that resistance, because it's still got to manage the bad things that you're doing. So your body is almost fighting with itself. And the more you drive up insulin, the more you become insulin resistant. And the more insulin resistant you get, the more insulin is forced to drive up. So hopefully engineers, but indeed anyone, can see this dreadful catastrophic feedback loop that's self-driving. And that's why so many people in the West are driven into a remorseless cycle until they are highly insulin resistant and their body is heading for the wall. With this cycle continuing, you'll have usually obesity building up, but your body will be getting insulin resistant across all of the periphery. Things are getting worse and worse. your pancreas at some point becomes quite impacted and begins to have trouble creating the insulin and managing it if you keep driving this cycle, which, as I said, is self-driving to a point if you keep doing these things. The insulin goes up and things just go way out of control. In most people in the Western world, by the time they're in their 60s or 70s, they're in this situation. And eventually the whole system is highly insulin resistant and it's kind of a hot mess. And at that stage, you might get diagnosed with advanced type 2 diabetes because the threshold for being called a type 2 diabetic is so high. You're 20 years on this journey being diabetic before you actually get called it, when your system is so out of control it meets the thresholds for the definition. Okay? And at that stage, game over, right? Insert insulin to continue. Because essentially you're going to have to now force insulin into your body because your pancreas is essentially burnt out and cannot provide the enormous amounts of insulin required to try and keep this whole hot mess hanging together somehow. And that's how bad it is, guys. So measuring it, part one, and here we're going to get into metabolic mayhem and flesh out what I've just told you. So measuring metabolic mayhem, the metabolic syndrome. And this was defined in 1988. It was also called Syndrome X by Gerald Reaven, MD, Professor Emeritus in Stanford. And clever guy, he worked out that low HDL good cholesterol, a low value, high blood triglycerides, large waist measurement, elevated blood pressure, or high blood sugar. These 5 things, if you had 3 out of the 5, you could be said to have metabolic syndrome. If you had 5 of them, you were bad. And if you had 2 of them, you still probably had it, but they picked 3. And what he had discovered over much research is it seemed to be intimately connected to much higher atherosclerosis, vascular disease, coronary heart disease. But as he researched further, he realized, shockingly, it showed much elevated risk for all of these things. Imagine all of the modern chronic diseases. And remember what I said earlier, we're talking about all of the major causes of death here, not just heart disease and stroke. But didn't I say earlier that insulin resistance was the big player? It was insulin resistance and hyperinsulin. And now you're thinking, but now Ivor's telling us there's this metabolic syndrome which looks like as bad or even worse. And that's kind of weird. Are there 2 big things to worry about? Well, no, you can relax. There are not 2 things to worry about. There's still only 1, and that keeps it quite simple. Because the metabolic syndrome is now properly called the insulin resistance syndrome, hyperinsulinemic syndrome. So now everything's lined up. We've got one big baddie, and we know how we can tackle it. High insulin secretion is the dead giveaway for this problem. It's one of the best measures you can do, but most doctors don't even know about it. If you don't measure it, it don't get fixed, and that's certainly true here. Everyone's been focusing on cholesterol when they were all along should have been focusing on insulin. So measuring it, part 2, master measures, and after this we're going to get into the solutions. Dr. Joseph Arcraft became a good friend. He died a few years ago at the age of 95. Brilliant pathologist. And he discovered incredible things around insulin. And he wrote a book about it, still available, and I recommend you read it. But I went and flew to Chicago when I discovered Joe, and Dr. Gerber, my co-author for Eat Rich, Live Long, our book, came from Denver. And we met with Joe in the Trump Tower with his son, and we did an interview before he passed away. And it's on YouTube, and I'll put the link below. But basically, Kraft discovered in the 70s a diabetes in situ test. Diabetes that's not yet acknowledged or shows up in the measurements. He could discover it, and he realized with horror how many people had undiagnosed diabetes. He created the 5-hour Kraft patterns using insulin measurements. So basically, you drink 75 grams of glucose, and he did 15,000 people over a decade with this test. You then wait and relax. They take blood tests at regular intervals, and you measure the insulin response of your body over time to the glucose load. So the glucose load makes your body work and get active, and the insulin response while it's doing that is massively informative. So basically you get the insulins over the 5 hours, though to be quite honest, a 2-hour insulin will tell you most of what you need to know, and you plot the curves. And when he brought all the curves back to his apartment, his first 1,000 curves, and looked at them and spread them out, he realized there were a few distinct curves. It was digital rather than all kinds of different curves. They fell into natural groups. Pattern 1 was healthy with a 2-hour insulin below 30 microunits generally. So that's one way of looking at being healthy. Just get a 2-hour insulin. Happy days. You are non-diabetic. But a huge proportion of his 15,000 patients who were not called diabetic when they came in, around 75% got pattern 2, 3 or 4, and there are varying degrees of insulin resistance, diabetes in situ. They are diabetic but not called diabetic by the normal tests. So that's his huge discovery. It's the earliest laboratory diagnosis for diabetes type 2, which is insulin resistance out of control. And did you know 64% of US adults over 45 years of age are now pre-diabetic or diabetic? And that's from the government National Health and Nutrition Survey. And that's just using glucose measures. But all of these people are essentially type 2 diabetic. The pre-diabetic is just misleading. It's confusing. They should not use it. They should call them diabetic when they have a problem, just like Kraft would. And pre-diabetic, diabetic, insulin resistant, hyperinsulinemic, metabolic syndrome, cardiometabolic syndrome, all of these different words to confuse everyone. It's all type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. Using Kraft tests, probably 70 or 75% of over 45s would essentially be type 2 diabetic. And he said those with cardiovascular disease not identified with diabetes are simply undiagnosed, i.e. almost all cardiovascular disease, if you measure the person properly, there's diabetes there under the hood. So I'll show you he was largely correct. Eurospar study was fascinating. It surveyed all coronary disease patients, or a subset of all of them across Europe, ages 18 to 80, across 24 European countries. And what did they find? Well, nearly a third of them, they found they were actually type 2 diabetics on their medical record. They kind of thought, whoa, that's a lot. They looked at the glucose and they said, uh-oh, there's another quarter who are type 2 diabetic, undiagnosed. And what's more, there's another quarter who are pretty much type 2 diabetic, but not quite reaching the number. 3/4 of them, all ages, all countries, were actually type 2 diabetic all along. And if you measured the others with insulin, you'd probably pick up another half of those. But they didn't use insulin, sadly. If you don't measure it, you can't understand it. And we have a lack of measurement of insulin and an understanding of how big this thing is. Undiagnosed type 2 diabetes, it is the root of the modern chronic disease and death tree. So now let's look at a root cause diagram for coronary vascular disease and see how you can avoid it. And I've kept this simple. You got your liver, insulin resistance drives hyperinsulin, drives insulin resistance. It's a self-reinforcing loop if you're putting the wrong things in the hatch. You get insulin resistant liver, you get fatty liver. It's an epidemic in the States. It's even an epidemic in children who never had it 50, 60 years ago. This drives high blood insulin, high blood glucose, high blood pressure. They're the classic measures, the simple ones. You get visceral fat building up, which drives more problems, and the problems drive more visceral fat. That's the belly fat inside in your organs. This problem drives atherogenic dyslipidemia, and this just means bad cholesterol of an atherogenic or vascular disease driving nature. It's higher VLDL, higher triglycerides, that's in your standard tests, lower HDL, that's in standard tests, higher oxidized LDL and LDL numbers of particles, but you don't get those so easily, and a higher total cholesterol divided by HDL ratio, or triglyceride over HDL ratio. So a lot of these things you can get in a standard cholesterol test. It's only the LDL value in a standard test that's kind of useless. All of this problem drives heart disease in a massive way. And it also drives a lot of the other problems too, in a very significant way. So don't forget those. What about the actionable root causes of this mess? What you want to know to fix it? Well, you got to get rid of excess fructose sugar, excess carbohydrate, refined carbohydrate, wheats, refined grains, all that stuff. Those two together coming in, bad news. So you can easily target that. Suboptimum omega-3 kind of fish oil, or low in fish oil and high in vegetable oils. Eliminate all vegetable oils, canola and sunflower and all those vegetable oils, and use olive oil or lard or tallow or coconut oil. All of those are natural fruit oils or meat oils. So get rid of the vegetable oils and get more fish, and get maybe cod liver oil, supplement, whatever. So you can easily do this. Suboptimum sun exposure and vitamin D. You can get your sun and get healthy, nutrient-dense, vitamin D high foods. So you can fix that. Suboptimum K2 and vitamin C and magnesium. Again, I don't have the scope to get into it here, but you can supplement and look after foods that are high in these. And genetic tendency is just something that's in there, but you can't do much about it. You focus on the other things. Lack of sleep and exercise is another driver. You can address that. And smoking, of course. You can stop smoking. Pollutants, you can do a certain amount, but I'm just acknowledging it's in there. And there's other causes too that are beyond the scope of today. Now remember, all these things, if you fix them, they will stop driving heart disease and other disease through other mechanisms beyond insulin resistance. So all of these things, when they're problematic, they drive inflammatory drivers, which will also cause disease and not even related to insulin resistance. So when you tackle these causes, you're just tackling the whole gamut. This is the inflammatory milieu. Heart disease and many of the others are inflammatory type diseases, and you can address these, and you can bring your inflammation right down and change your future. Part 3, the power of the CAC score, the ultimate test for coronary vascular disease. So really quickly here, here's a CT scan of my co-author, Dr. Jeffrey Gerber, and he has no calcium in his coronary arteries. 0 score. Incredible, great result to get at 53 or 4. I have one age 48. Here's a high score. You've got calcium all the way up your widowmaker artery. So whoever this is, they have a score of 600 or 700 maybe. A massive indicator of risk. 10, 15 times higher risk than people with no calcium. And it shows that they're burning their arteries out over the years. Just to show you the risk, if you have a low score, regardless of age from this study, your risk in the next 10 years is very low. It's as low as you can ever hope for. 1 or 2% over 10 years. If you have a medium score, 1 to 100, the risk is maybe 5 times higher than that. And if you have a high score, over 100 in this case, your risk goes up to 15 times higher. So it's a massive indicator. Simple CT scan for a CAC score, $100 in the US, a couple of €100 or sterling in Europe. And just to emphasize, a guy in his 50s with a high score, and many of them have, they just don't know it, is at much higher risk in the next 10 years of a heart attack than an old guy with a low score. But it's rare to have a low score when you're old. But the point is well made. Now, diabetes and insulin resistance and CAC. I wanted to tell you about CAC so I could explain this stunning paper. And it's a warranty paper. Mortality with a low or 0 CAC at start. Here's a 15-year tracking of diabetic people type 2 and non-diabetic people, looking at all those people who had a 0 at the start of the 15 years. And what we see is non-diabetics, the green line, have a warranty. They're all-cause mortality. So many are alive and so few have died after 15 years that the team actually called it a warranty. It's not guaranteed, but it's a warranty. Diabetics type 2, maybe they had 4 or 5 year warranty, but it doesn't last because they're burning their arteries fast and hard, and the calcium's going to come within a few years most likely. So a non-diabetic, maybe with a 0 score, after 10 years you might check and make sure you haven't become diabetic or insulin resistant and you're still good, and that's okay around 10 years. And a type 2 diabetic, unless your bloods are fixed and you fixed your diet and lifestyle and everything's much better, a few years you really need to check because you can see how that curve takes off. Now, This is quite shocking, so I've blocked it. I'm going to reveal it now. With a CAC greater than 400 at the start, and I know many people with scores of thousands at middle age, what do the curves look like? Well, here you are. Type 2 diabetics with a 400 over 15 years, nearly a 50% mortality. Non-diabetics even, to be honest, a lot of them were diabetic, undiagnosed. Even they have nearly a 30% mortality at 15 years. Do you see the difference here in CAC score? But it just shows you the carnage. There's no warranty for anyone when you have a high CAC score, but you can get your warranty back if you do what I'm saying here and you stop the progression. Your high score won't really matter anymore if you stop the process that's damaging your arteries. The calcium will just stay there as a scar. You need to implement a fix ASAP if you have a high score, obviously, and you need to check back in a couple of years to make sure that things are leveling off. Now, very quickly, a soupçon of the scientific solutions to this. Here are the solutions. They're not hard. They may be challenging to make new habits and change your life, but they're not technically hard at all. So, a few studies. Here's all the things that drive heart disease, mainly hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, like we said, but I've added a few more as well. And this paper was fantastic. It showed that the low-fat diet that came into being 50 years ago because they thought it would lower the LDL, but we know the LDL is not really the thing to focus on. So does a low-fat diet actually target the real root causes? Absolutely not. It's running after LDL. And then if you look at all the things that I focus on, and Professor Volok and many, many more, these crucial measures, does a low-carb keto type diet target these? Absolutely. Bang on. There's mountains of published papers showing the low carb and keto is fantastic for improving these metrics. It doesn't really care about LDL. So low fat is just an orphan kind of nonsense diet that came into being because of mistaken beliefs. So yeah, these are the types of diets that attack root cause. And this study from Professor Volok in humans was incredible, and it shows the low carb basically reduced, in orange there, much, much better, all of the things you want to reduce for health. And higher or raised the HDL, which is the one thing you want higher. And the low-fat diet basically was a weak performer across the board. So low carb in a head-to-head or CT randomized trial blew away low-fat, unsurprisingly, because it targets the actual root causes. And Verta did an amazing job, a 6 and 12-month follow-up, and all they did was put people on a low-carb keto diet who were type 2 diabetic, and they got incredible results, including 94% decreased or eliminated the insulin they needed to take, and 60% went into remission. They were technically no longer type 2 at the end of it. And medical science and dogma says type 2 cannot be reversed or put in remission. It will always progress and get worse. So that's nonsense when you do the right thing. So targeting the root causes. This one was great too, and it was with military personnel, and I'm showing a lot of Voloks because he designs them so well and they're so well executed. They're just great. And basically they went in with a keto style low carb diet, gave them support and recipes, that was all. And they lost weight, they lost body fat, they lost a lot of visceral fat compared to the standard diet. This is the bad fat. And their insulin resistance went down around 30% in 3 months. Now that's fantastic. That's attacking root cause. And this single case study, but it's really interesting. A person with early Alzheimer's, he had brain fog. He was a very bad case, relatively young to be in this state. And when they switched him to a kind of low-carb keto diet alone, his insulin resistance level went down 90%. Talk about a collapse. His fasting insulin collapsed. His triglyceride over HDL went down over 50%. That's the measure of insulin resistance from your cholesterol profile. His blood sugar went down so far he became not type 2 diabetic, and his MoCA cognitive score actually went up. That's not meant to go up. They were really amazed. So this industry standard cognitive score actually improved a lot. So that's attacking root cause in a very dramatic way. And final wrap up. Simple as you got to get rid of all the processed food, refined grains, vegetable oils, seed oils, sugary drinks, and margarines made with seed oils, and pastas and breads that are all refined grain. I mean, they're all junk. And of course, sweets and sugary things. You got to bring them right down, and ultra processed food, get it right down, because that's made up of all of this kind of junk food. And you got to switch to an ancestral, real, healthy human diet. That's what you got to do. It's delicious. It's amazing. You can enjoy your steaks, your ribeyes. Eggs are a superfood. Butter has got nutrients in it, and it's perfectly fine. You don't eat pounds of it, but it's great. Low sugar vegetables, fish are fantastic. Low sugar berry fruits, avocados, high fat, olives, high fat, cheese is great. So it is a higher fat diet and lower carb, but you're not running after fat trying to eat it. You're just eating real ancestral food, and it happens to be higher fat and lower carb. Add in exercise, add in some key nutrients and minerals like magnesium especially, maybe fish oil, DHA, EPA, and you are on the road to fixing these problems, dramatically changing your future risk, getting much more years of life, but also all of your years of life, a few weeks, like myself, I showed you at the start, all of your years of life will be far healthier, and you will feel far better. You'll be more productive, more mentally aware and sharp, and your whole life will improve, and you'll look great too, because you'll lose quite a lot of weight almost invariably. So that is the way to go, guys, and hope you now understand cholesterol versus the real deal, insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia.
Well, there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed that and take the lessons on board. So here at Imagine That, we're hoping to really grow this channel with informative and very useful shorts that are also entertaining. But we do need you to subscribe and hit the notification bell and comment widely below. And of course, if possible, do share our channel so that others may benefit. So until next time, thank you.